My name is Bob Geller. Welcome to this episode of PR Done and Dunner. I could go on and on about our next guest bio, but that would take up the full show. Joseph Steinberg is a respected authority in cybersecurity. He's a serial entrepreneur. He holds multiple patents. He's an innovator. He's one of only a few people in the world to hold 4 advanced information security certifications. He's written 2 books, writes for major publications. He's a speaker, and he's a top cybersecurity influencer. And we've gotten to know Joseph through our work in the field. In fact, Joseph serves on the advisory board of Fusion PR client Sepio Systems, a company that is blazing a trail in zero trust hardware security. So welcome to PR Done and Dunner, Joseph.
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening from New York City.
Great view in the background there. We're talking about the world of cybersecurity, marketing, and PR. I think this topic should generally be of interest to anybody working in some noisy, complicated B2B tech field and might be curious about how to best stand out and work with influencers. And the focus here, of course, is specifically on cybersecurity. It seems like a crazy time. It's front page news. There are so many companies in the mix. And we both deal with cyber tech coming from Israel, where a lot of the great innovation comes from. Last July, the New York Times wrote about skyrocketing valuations of cyber startups. They pegged the VC investment for 2021 at being north of $12 billion. And Forbes wrote that there are 22,000 plus startups who either compete in or rely on cybersecurity. So I guess the question I have, and I'm sure others watching this are trying to figure out, where's this all going? I mean, is there room in the market for so many vendors? Is the market saturated?
That's a great question. So let's start from the beginning. And by beginning, I mean, think back in your own life 25 years ago. How many passwords did you have? How many systems did you access that required any form of security? Now think about the same questions and the answers to those questions today, right? It's dramatically more passwords, dramatically more systems for probably anybody who's old enough to have remembered 25 years ago. When you think about that growth, it's not surprising that cybersecurity companies and the cybersecurity industry have grown accordingly as well. So, whereas 25 years ago, cybersecurity was almost, or a little bit more than 25 years ago, almost all government related, military related, a little bit towards the financial sector. Now it's consumer, business, nonprofit, government, everything under the sun exists within the cybersecurity sector because everybody is at risk. And everybody's got lots of data, and everybody's got lots of data that hackers want or other parties want because they can abuse it. So the industry has grown along with the need. That said, you said there's 22,000 companies out there. Obviously, some of them will become great, some of them will fail, and many of them will be somewhere in between, acquired or merged, operate, with a profit, but never become great. There's all, every shade of gray in between. But it's not surprising that there are that many companies when you think of the growth of the industry, and also considering the fact that cybersecurity is an area where there is a lot of money being spent. And if you're going to build a startup, you typically want to build it in an area where there is, money, and where there is going to be not only investment, but money for exits as well. And larger companies often acquire cybersecurity companies at very nice valuations. And it's not surprising that there's a lot of growth there. So while there are a lot of companies in the space, we're nowhere near the point where there are too many companies or too many ideas. Far from it.
Right, but they can't all succeed. So I guess the question is, what will separate the winners from the losers, do you think?
So I think in terms of success versus failure, the most significant factor is the team. And that is probably true across industries. If you have a management team that can execute, they can execute often even with a mediocre idea, and certainly with a great idea. If you have a management team that cannot execute, it doesn't really matter how good the idea is. The company is likely to fail because the team can't run a business or can't run that business. So I think the team is an extremely significant factor in terms of success. And when I say team, it could be a team that's been experienced in building companies and succeeding in the past. You had mentioned Sepio, for example. Their management team is experienced. It could also be first-time entrepreneurs, but who are successful in school, in the military, in jobs before, but have demonstrated management skills, the ability to understand industry, to understand customers, to understand prospect needs, to understand competition. All these types of factors, the ability to pivot when situations arise, all of this, the skills that are needed to succeed, a management team that has them is much more likely to succeed than one that doesn't. So that's number one. When it comes to cybersecurity, I think the other thing to keep in mind is successful companies tend to have offerings that solve real problems that the people spending money on cybersecurity solutions know are real problems and are willing to spend money to correct. And what I mean by that is the following. If you put out a new device that is slightly incrementally better than an existing device that management has spent a lot of money on in the last year, it's a lot harder to convince them to throw out what they have and replace it. First of all, from a political standpoint, if a chief information security officer had requested a $500,000 a year budget for something, and then goes back and says, hey, I want to rip it out, 6 months later says, I want to rip it out and put in something new, it'll cost me another $500,000, there's going to be a lot of questions raised. And if the existing technology or service is viewed as good enough, or, will catch up to the new one in a few months, in many cases, the CISO may just say, I'm not interested. I'm not going to do that, not only because of the cost, but I don't know what problems are going to come along with the new one. I don't know what human issues could come in, what conflicts could come in, just not worth it for me. I don't want to invest the time, the money, and my employees are already overloaded as it is. So thank you, but no thank you. If you're coming with an offering that's solving a problem that the CISO knows that he or she has and knows that he or she is not addressing. I mean, just take the Sepio case again, right? Sepio is addressing the fact that most organizations really do not have complete lists of the hardware attached to their networks. In a best case, they're abstracted, right? We have 300 laptops that we bought from company X, but they have no idea what the network cards in those devices are. They may not all be the same network cards. They're relying on the manufacturer. They don't know if there's vulnerabilities in those cards, right? That's a best case. In most cases, they probably don't even know how many laptops are out there, how many devices are connected, et cetera. We know that's a risk, right? At the same time, the government is saying all this, Chinese hardware should be banned from company X, company Y. Most organizations have no idea if they actually have that hardware, because it could be within their laptops or within their servers or within their network, networking equipment or other places in the infrastructure. So we have government saying there's a problem, it's a security risk, it could be backdoors, we don't want you buying X, Y, Z, and most companies have no idea if they actually have, such products or similar products. So Sepio is coming in and solving, to a great extent, a large portion of that problem, or helping CISOs solve that problem, which they have not solved and which they have not invested in to date. So that's a great offering, solving a problem the CISO knows, solving a problem that they haven't spent money in, and solving a problem that's getting high profile attention from the government. Okay, so that is something that's attractive because it stands out and is not politically something that the CISO has to explain why they're spending more money solving a problem that they already solved. So those are the kinds of things, good management team and solving a big problem, right? A problem that could pose serious risks that they know about, that's in the media, so other management knows about it, and that has not been solved yet. Those are things that stand out.
I see. What if the situation where maybe the CISO, the CSO does not realize they have that problem? Possibly. Or I guess a lot of this gets down to priorities and triaging, because all things being equal, they'd love to have all the best technology and they'd love to apply it and be super secure, but that's not realistic, right? So
here's the important thing to understand. The CISO of a business is not going to be building a cyber Fort Knox. Okay, if you're the CISO of the CIA, you're going to act differently than the CISO of Goldman Sachs, who will act differently than the CISO of a medium-sized business, who will operate very differently than whoever's running information security for a 3-location candy store. These are very different environments with very different risks, very different budgets, very different mechanisms of addressing the situation, very different levels of manpower and skills. So in theory, it would be nice to have every possible technology combined with, unlimited human resources, but that doesn't exist. And in fact, there's a tremendous shortage of qualified cybersecurity personnel. So CISOs have to focus on the risks that are most threatening. Essentially, what are my biggest risks that are actual risks likely to cause real problems? And that's why I was saying, something that's incrementally better, that's giving a little bit more value may not be high priority, even if it's real value, because AI don't have human resources and they're busy addressing things that are of, very serious concern because they pose serious risks and are unaddressed. And then there's the political factor, right? If I've invested in this already, I would rather use the money for something I haven't invested in, because otherwise I'm going to have to explain why I'm spending more money on something that I already said I solved. So it's really about prioritization and focusing on, a company that focuses on the things that are high priority to the CISO, that especially if they can't get good solutions elsewhere, should be very successful.
That makes sense. Assuming the cyber tech company checks off those boxes, they have a great management team, great tech, it's differentiated. What are some of the tips or secrets for standing out in such a crowded field?
Thank you for asking that question, because it's something I really would like to discuss with people who are making pitches from the PR industry about cybersecurity. So I don't write full time, and I at times get 1,000 pitches a month. That's 1,000 pitches in a month. Okay.
How do you
There's
decide
no
which
way
one
I
to
can
open?
possibly.
How do you decide which one to even open? I mean, is it a good subject line?
So that's the
or?
point. When I'm going through pitches, I'm not going to be reading a 10-paragraph pitch.
Okay.
You need a good subject, a very, very short beginning of the email that says exactly why I should spend time reading this pitch and ignoring the other ones, because that's what the choice is for me, right? It's not, okay, why don't I read all the pitches? If I read all the pitches and spent time on them, I wouldn't be able to work. So get your value proposition across very quickly. I would say the best pitch to me is probably 3 sentences. Okay. This is what we have. This is why I think it's important to you. And this is what it's solving that you couldn't solve before. And this is why that's a big deal to you. Basically 3 things. This is what I have. This is why it's important. And this is what it's fixing. And if you're putting in a 20-page white paper, or even a 1-page or 2-page data sheet, there is 0 chance I'm going to read that when you send it to me. And the full-time journalists are getting more pitches. So I would say in many, many cases, if not most cases, if not all cases, there's 0 chance they're going to read it unless they are expecting it, or you're sending it and you are, for some reason, a company that they are interested in following already. But out of the blue to send a white paper, do you really think,
No.
I mean, you really think I'm going to sit down and read a 20-page white paper to understand your value proposition? Get it through in 1, 2, max 3 sentences. It's sort of the same thing that I was saying about the CISO. You got to communicate that value. This is an important thing for you to read and to understand, because it solves a problem that you couldn't solve before, that is a big problem because you've been talking about it, because you've spoken about it at a conference, because you've written about it. A pitch like that is dramatically better than, hey, I've got the latest and greatest company and it's going to be just like Uber or Airbnb. You send me a pitch like that, there's almost no chance I'm going to go past that sentence, number 1. Number 2, there's a lot of pitches that come in with lots of buzzwords, right? And I sometimes joke, it's almost like you have companies saying, it's almost like a TV ad. Spend $18.99 now and get 0 trust. And for an extra $1, we'll throw in IoT and AI. I mean, it just, the overuse of buzzwords when value propositions are not communicated, it's a turnoff, right?
But
say
somebody
what
like you understand the buzzwords. Somebody like you. You're saying maybe the PR people who are using them don't understand them, but they're not putting them together well, or they're.
I think in many cases they know that the buzzwords are supposed to attract attention because they're topics that are getting a lot of media. So they want to piggyback on that. Sometimes the companies aren't even in that space and it's a misuse of the word. Sometimes it's thrown in there because they think it's going to help, but don't. Just say what you have, because in the end, I'm not going to be more interested because you threw 16 buzzwords in the lead.
Good point.
Say what you have, say why it's valuable and why I should be interested. And if I'm interested, I'll follow up.
Do you think press releases still work? Is it any more interesting to you if it's, quote, hard news in a press release?
So press releases are still necessary, despite I know a lot of people are saying that, they're dead. It's just simply not true. But they serve a different purpose than they served a generation ago.
Yeah.
Press releases are not good for pitches because they're too long. So if you're sending a press release as a pitch, just assume that the person receiving it is probably reading the title, maybe the subtitle, and the first or second sentence max. If it's sent, unsolicited. It's certainly in my case, that's all I'm going to take a look at. If that's enough to attract me because it communicated the things that I said before about pitches, then it will work potentially. If it's something I'm interested in. If it doesn't do that in the first few sentences, it's not going to serve any value as a pitch, at least not to me. And probably not to other people who are busy. As I said, they're getting a tremendous number of these. They can't possibly read through every press release that's sent to them. But press releases serve another purpose, which is they get posted on websites, they go into the news wires, etc. So they serve not only search engine optimization purposes, but if a journalist or an analyst is following a particular company and has configured, for example, a Google News alert to notify them of any mention of that company in the news, and then a press release goes out, they will get that from the automatic search engine from Google in their email. And that is different than a pitch coming from the vendor themselves, right? If they're saying, give me the news on these 6 vendors, and that day 2 of them have news, and one of them is, your press release, they're going to see that. And that has value.
So it's not necessarily just about visibility. Are there other ways to get attention apart from traditional PR, would you say, to get on the radar of CISOs and CSOs and security professionals?
I mean, you mentioned earlier, influencers, people who are sharing content that's getting widely shared within the industry are often a good partner to get the word out. Many of the influencers who actually have influence won't share vendor press releases, but if they find something interesting or there's an interesting demo, whether a video or a write-up, something short, that may attract their attention and they may share it. Sometimes they may charge for some of this and flag it as an ad. Sometimes it may be not paid. It's just, hey, they found this really cool and they decided to share it. But be very careful when you deal with influencers that you're dealing with people who are actually influential in the field, as opposed to people who, tweet 53 times a day and are, being retweeted by people who have nothing to do with the field. So yeah, they may be reaching eyeballs, but they're not reaching the eyeballs that would actually buy product, and they're not influencing buyers, because in the end, if you're trying to sell product, that's what you need. You need the people who are buying it to see it, not just random audiences.
Absolutely. I like to say influence is more than just a number, and it gets to a lot of things. It gets to actual experience and reputation. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's one of the reasons we're speaking with you, of course. You're
Thank you.
a very respected name in the field. And I guess a question a lot of tech companies might have, tech marketers, is, are there any tips to working with an influencer to yourself? What do you look for when you team up with a vendor? I'm sure there's some paid options, maybe some organic options, but what are some quick tips?
So I'll tell you, because I think this is probably true across most influencers that, I deal with and that I would recommend. And I have recommended other influencers for campaigns, because not always is something a great fit for me. And in that case, I'd rather not mess up my brand by, taking an advertisement in an area that I don't want to be associated with, or that, I'm saturating too much, because I take very limited number of paid pieces and paid, sponsored posts. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, influencers who actually have influence have probably spent a tremendous amount of time and money building their audiences.
Yep.
Keeping that in mind, understand that coming to someone who's done that and asking them, for example, hey, would you share this and we'll share your piece, is not a good thing to do. Any influencer who's willing to do something like that probably doesn't have the audience that you need if you're actually trying to sell product. especially in the cybersecurity industry, because the amount of time and money that gets spent building the audience and building a reputation is tremendous. This is this people's business. This is their career. I mean, you wouldn't walk into a car dealer and say, hey, if you give me a car, I'll post it online and say that it's a great car. When you come to an influencer who's really doing this as a business and really has influence, you need to understand you're paying not just for the post, but you're paying for the time, the effort, and the money that went into everything to get to the point of having the audience and refining that audience and getting that audience to trust. So that's number one. Number two, trust the influencer to know his or her business. Sometimes you have marketing people who have not necessarily worked with influencers before, who, for whatever reason, want more influence into what posts look like than they should, who feel that there should be a higher number of posts because the more posts, the better. Trust the influencers. When the influencers say, hey, that's too many posts over too short a time, it's not going to work. It's going to be spamming. Sometimes less is better. Trust the influencer on how to word things. The influencer knows his or her audience. They know what works. They know what doesn't work. So I'm not saying that a business shouldn't play a role in helping to craft posts, but I'm saying trust the influencer if they tell you, hey, your idea of running, 10 posts in a week is absolutely not going to work. Or your idea of, making this sound too much like an ad, or it's too over the top in terms of wording, even if it's flagged as ad, is just not going to work. Trust them. They know their audiences. They've been working with these audiences for years. They've built the audiences. They've built trust. They know what works and what doesn't. And that's another point I think that's very, very important. The third thing is understand that different platforms require different types of posts. So it's not always as simple as saying, well, make the post and share it on, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, because the posts sometimes should be very different for those different audiences. There's different people using these platforms. They have different personas. They're often different ages, looking for different things. So the same content may not necessarily work well. Something that works great on LinkedIn may not work well on TikTok. It's not hard to understand that. But often people try to save money and say, well, let's just make one video and post it everywhere. Not a good idea. And then the final thing is don't discount the value of going across platforms. Many businesses will say, hey, I don't need to be on TikTok. I don't need to be on Instagram. I just need to be on LinkedIn. That's where the professionals are. That is almost always wrong. I'm saying that as an absolute. That is almost always wrong. Think about it like this. When I first used Musical.ly, which is the precursor to TikTok, going back almost 6 years, right? The people who were the older users of that platform, I don't know how old they were, but let's say they were in their late teens. Many of them are working full time today. So if they were interested in technology then, they could be engineers today working in the field, right? When you think about Instagram, the people who were using Instagram in college 6 years ago, a huge percentage of them are working professionally now. Many of whom, by the way, have disposable incomes. A lot of technology people were on these platforms and are now working in technology jobs. So don't discount the value of the platforms with a younger audience, because A, some of the users today are in your potential audience, and B, as time progresses, many more users may end up as either buyers of the products you're pushing or services you're pushing, or as influencers into those decisions, right? The engineering team may not make the final decision on buying a security product, but the CISO organization engineers certainly influence it. And so you may want to post something different there than you're sending to LinkedIn, where you're trying to hit the CISO, for example, or the direct reports to the CISO. But at the same time, you don't want to leave out the people who influence those decisions on the lower end. So the lower end of the totem pole, I should say. So the point is you want that mix. So if an influencer says, hey, this kind of campaign, we should probably hit these platforms, they may have an idea what they're talking about.
That makes sense. Do you find most teams on the client side understand this? Is there a lot of education involved? Is there often an agency intermediary who helps them and connect with you and make it happen?
It's a mix. Today, you have a lot of companies that have dealt with influencers. You have a lot of companies whose PR people and marketing people do understand, that the world has changed from the era of the press release faxed to journalists to a very different kind of environment today. I sometimes call it the Twitter generation, right? If you think about how short a tweet is, even with the newer, longer tweets of the last few years, it's still very short. That's people's attention span. So there are plenty of people who understand those differences, but at the same time, not everybody has fully grasped the changes. I think PR agencies are generally on the better side of this because they've dealt with more journalists and writers and analysts on a more regular basis, so they've seen the change up front. But not necessarily all of the PR agency's clients have understood this. And so it's something that both the PR people in PR firms, as well as the journalists, columnists, analysts have to deal with when they deal with, internal marketing people at times. But as time goes on, more and more folks understand this.
And it'd be great that's very helpful tips. Thank you. It'd also be great to talk more about you, Joseph Steinberg, specifically the types of things you're involved with now, what kinds of projects you're looking for, what kinds of specific engagements on the influencer level you might be looking at or consider.
So what I do professionally that would probably be useful for some or many of the people watching this particular podcast is I help companies in the cybersecurity and related fields succeed. I sit on advisory boards. I sometimes do influencer work outside of the advisory boards. And what the goal of these types of efforts are first of all, to make the brands better known. So obviously, I have an audience that I've developed over the years. I have a column with millions of readers. I have social media with large followings within the cybersecurity and related spaces. So I try to get them brand recognition for their major contributions and improvements to cybersecurity so that the right audience can learn about the company and what it's doing. As I mentioned before, if they're solving a big problem that people know about, it's the kind of thing that is, something that a CISO would like to know about and may spend money on. So that's, I'm trying to do that both from a sales perspective and a branding perspective. And then I also try to give advice based on, my years in the field. I built a couple cybersecurity product companies, worked in the service industry as well, both from accomplishments and from mistakes that I've made to help provide strategic advice to help these companies flourish. Often these companies are post-seed, meaning they've raised some money, but they're before their venture fund or, venture investing, or venture fund has already invested Series A. Sometimes already, several rounds of money have come in, but they're at the point where they really want to grow and they want someone who can come and really help the brand grow its recognition in a very large way. You had mentioned before, for example, Israeli companies, very often they've built customers in Israel. And when they come to the United States, they really need to start developing brand. I can help a lot in that regard. I also serve as an expert witness on cases related to cybersecurity, data breaches, cybersecurity related patent infringement cases and the like, trade secret theft, things of that nature. So if hopefully you're not involved in any litigation related to this, but if you know lawyers who deal with cyber cases and the like, that's another area that I work in. And as I mentioned, besides the advisory work, I also do occasional influencer campaigns, and I run sponsored content on my website. That's how I pay for it. So while I write most of my articles and provide knowledge for free, what pays for the site is sponsored content. Sometimes that's material from companies that it's always my material. It's vendor neutral material, but there'll be a sponsor message on the bottom. Sometimes those are coming from companies that I'm serving on their advisory board. Sometimes it's coming from other companies, but it's also an opportunity. As I said, the website can get millions of reads in a month, and there's a disproportionate number of readers, obviously, who are interested in cybersecurity, AI, and related matters. So it's a targeted audience and an opportunity to reach that targeted audience with a message that's not coming as an ad that they don't want to see, but coming as an educational piece with a sponsor message that they do want to see. So those are the three things that I spend my time on. Essentially, it's 3 full-time jobs. So
sounds like a lot. You're saying?
I'm saying I sometimes say I work 80 hours a week for myself, so I don't have to work 40 for someone else.
Well, I trust that this year will be a busy year for you, hopefully, and a bullish year for cybersecurity in general. And I guess having said that, I think I'd say we're done for this episode. Would you agree? Is there anything else to add, or are we pretty much done?
I think we've had a great conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate your tips. And I'll share your information in the show notes. And with that, I hope we stay in touch and look forward to seeing you soon. And why don't we close out with the Zoom 5, okay?
You got it.
Zoom 5.